In 149 before the Common Era, a delegation from Carthage stood in the Roman camp outside Utica. They had already met every demand. 300 children of the leading families had been handed over as hostages. Then came the next order. Carthage was to surrender its weapons. The city gave up 200,000 sets of armor and 2,000 catapults. Appian records the figures. The envoys had disarmed their own city to prove good faith. Then the consuls delivered the final term. Carthage was to be abandoned. Its people would resettle at least 10 miles from the coast. For a port that lived by the sea, this was not a relocation order. It was an instruction to stop existing as Carthage. The envoys had come to negotiate a settlement. They learned there had never been a negotiation. This episode examines a single failure. The richest trading power in the Western Mediterranean disarmed itself, believing that compliance could buy survival. It had believed that for 100 years. The question is why. Carthage was founded by Phoenician settlers on the coast of modern Tunisia. By the 3rd century before the Common Era, it governed a commercial network across the Western Mediterranean. This file covers the years from 264 to 146 before the Common Era. That is the span of the 3 wars Rome and Carthage fought. They run from the first clash over Sicily to the city's destruction. The 3 wars were not continuous. They fell in 264 to 241, 218 to 201, and 149 to 146. Between them lay decades of nominal peace. The contested ground ran from Sicily and Sardinia to Spain, with the Numidian kingdom pressing on Carthage's African border. One problem shapes everything that follows. Carthage left almost no voice of its own. Its libraries were dispersed when the city fell in 146. What survives of its own writing is a single farming manual. We read Carthage through the people who defeated it. The main witness is Polybius, a Greek writer who stood beside the Roman commander at the end. He drew on both Roman and Carthaginian informants. Appian, writing later, preserves much of Polybius now otherwise lost. Livy, Diodorus Siculus and Plutarch fill the rest. Every Carthaginian motive in this account is reported by an outsider. That limit is part of the evidence, not a footnote to it. The central question is narrow. Why did Carthage fail across 3 wars? To see that Rome intended not to defeat it, but to erase it. This channel adopts one reading. Carthage's failure was interpretive, not material. The city had the resources to survive. What it lacked was an accurate model of its enemy. We set this against the older school that explains the war mainly through Roman fear. This is not a retelling of Hannibal's march on Italy. The Alps and Cannae appear here only as evidence. They show how even victory failed to change the way Carthage read Rome. The forensic question is the misreading. The battles are secondary. To see why the frame held, begin with the strength it rested on. Carthage was strong, and the strength was real. Its first advantage was the sea. At the outbreak of the First Punic War, Polybius records Carthage as the dominant naval power of the Western Mediterranean. Its trade reached from North Africa to Spain, Sardinia and Sicily. But naval supremacy was a position, not a possession. When Rome decided to build a fleet, it copied a wrecked Carthaginian warship and reproduced it. Polybius describes the process. Within a few years, Rome contested the sea Carthage had owned. Rome went further. It fitted its ships with a boarding bridge called the Corvus. The device turned a sea fight into a land fight on water. The advantage that had defined Carthage could be built by a rival inside a single war. Its second advantage was its army. Carthage hired professional soldiers from across the Mediterranean rather than conscripting its citizens. The system was flexible and spared the citizen body. It carried one cost. The soldiers were loyal to Pame, not to the city. Its contingents came from Libya, Iberia, Numidia, and the Balearic Islands. They fought well under a capable general. They held no stake in Carthage itself. When the pay failed after this first war, the mercenaries turned on Carthage in the war of 241 to 237. The revolt nearly destroyed the city from inside, and against Rome, Carthage could not win a long war of attrition. Polybius counted Roman and allied manpower in the hundreds of thousands. Its third advantage was its constitution. At its head stood 2 annually elected magistrates, the suffets, alongside a senate and a powerful tribunal of judges. Aristotle had praised the Carthaginian system as a model of balance. By the time of the Punic Wars, Polybius judged that the balance had passed its prime. Commercial interest now swayed public deliberation. The result was a state that swung between a war faction and a peace faction. It held no settled policy toward Rome. No institution carried a corrected reading of the enemy from one generation to the next. Its fourth advantage came late. After the defeat of 201, Carthage recovered its wealth within a single generation. The recovery had a name. Hannibal, the general Rome had beaten, came home and was elected suffet. Livy records that he reformed the courts and the public finances. The treasury filled again within a few years. That recovery was read in Rome not as stability but as resurgence. Its fifth advantage was the treaty. Carthage and Rome had a treaty history reaching back centuries, recorded by Polybius. Carthage treated those treaties as binding obligations between states. Rome treated them as instruments to be revised when strength allowed. Each of these strengths shared one feature. Each depended on Rome behaving like a normal rival. None could survive Rome behaving as an exception. The treaty network is where the failure becomes visible. Rome's demands grew with each settlement. Carthage read each demand as a separate transaction. The First Punic War ended in 241. Carthage gave up Sicily and agreed to an indemnity. Polybius records the terms. The defeat was severe, but it fit the frame. A war was lost, a price was paid, and trade resumed. Carthage treated it as a recoverable setback. The first true signal came in 237. Carthage was consumed by the mercenary revolt. Rome chose that moment to seize Sardinia. It then demanded a further 1,200 talents under threat of a new war. There was no basis for this in the existing peace. Carthage was in no position to refuse. Polybius names the seizure of Sardinia as the single greatest cause of the next war. It was open proof that a treaty with Rome offered no protection. Carthage drew a different lesson. Rather than reassess Rome, it built a new empire in Spain to replace what it had lost. Under Hamilcar Barca and his family, Carthage took control of southern Spain and its silver mines. The silver paid the indemnity and rebuilt the army. The second signal was the settlement of 201 after the defeat of Hannibal. The terms reduced Carthage to a Roman client. Carthage paid 10,000 talents across 50 years. Its fleet was cut to 10 ships. It surrendered its war elephants. It gave up the right to wage any war outside Africa and any war inside Africa without Roman permission, and Rome recognized the Numidian king Massinissa's claims along Carthage's border. Carthage now had a Roman client at its frontier and no legal means to resist him. It read the terms as harsh but survivable. The third signal came in 191. Carthage offered to pay the entire remaining indemnity at once, decades ahead of schedule. Livy records the offer. Rome refused it. The refusal carried a clear message. Rome did not want the debt cleared. It wanted Carthage bound. Carthage read it as an ordinary diplomatic exchange. It did not register that its own solvency had become the threat. For the next 40 years the message repeated. Massinissa seized Carthaginian land along the frontier again and again. He took the coastal trading posts of the Emporia, then the fertile plains inland. The seizures were transparent, and Rome's verdicts were never in doubt. Each time, Carthage appealed to Rome to arbitrate. Each time, Rome ruled against Carthage or simply delayed. The arbitration system was the trap, and Carthage kept walking into it. The frame had no other move. Then the policy hardened. In 153, Cato the Elder came to Carthage on one such arbitration. He found a recovered city, dense with people and trade. He returned to Rome convinced the city had to be destroyed. Plutarch reports a habit he kept from then on. He closed every speech in the Senate with the same demand, whatever its subject. From that point, a faction in the Senate sought annihilation regardless of anything Carthage did. The variable had left Carthage's hands. By 151, Carthage paid the final installment of the indemnity. It was now free of debt and in Roman eyes more dangerous for it. In 150, pushed past endurance by Massinissa, Carthage raised an army and fought him. It lost the battle at Oroscopa. And it had now waged war without Roman permission. The Treaty of 201 was broken. Rome had the legal pretext it had been waiting for. Carthage's one act of self-defense was the act that condemned it. Every one of these signals said the same thing. The rules were not rules. Each was paid, filed, or appealed. None was understood. The political signals were misread. To understand why, look at how Carthage read danger itself. A caution comes first. We have almost no Carthaginian account of Carthaginian religion. What we have comes from Greek and Roman writers, often hostile ones. We are reconstructing a mind from the testimony of the people who set out to destroy it. The episode that follows is recorded by an enemy, and it must be read as such. The record is from 310 before the Common Era, more than a century before the destruction. Agathocles of Syracuse had landed an army in Africa and was threatening the city. Diodorus Siculus reports the Carthaginian response. The leading families concluded that the gods were angry. Wealthy citizens had been substituting purchased children for their own in sacrifice. To correct the debt, Diodorus says, they sacrificed 500 children to the god the Greeks called Kronos. The framework here is precise. A military reverse was read as a ritual deficit. The remedy was a larger, costlier offering. The danger was understood as an imbalance in the ledger with the gods. That framework could not work because the threat was not in the ledger. It was an army on the coast. The response scaled the ritual instead of reading the enemy. The remedy assumed the danger was a symptom of divine anger. The real danger was Agathocles, and he was still on the beach. The scale of Carthaginian sacrifice is disputed. Some scholars, including Josephine Quinn, read the burial ground and the Greek sources as evidence of real ritual killing. A skeletal study led by Jeffrey Schwartz, published in 2010, argues the remains fit ordinary infant mortality instead. The forensic point does not depend on the number. The point is the framework. When threat is read through the wrong frame, the response intensifies the frame rather than replacing it. That is the diagnosis of this whole episode, recorded a century early. The same frame ran in reverse on the Roman side. In that same decade, Cato the Elder wanted Carthage destroyed. To make the danger vivid, Plutarch reports, he let fresh African figs fall from his toga onto the Senate floor. The land that grew them, he noted, lay 3 days' sail away. The fruit was still ripe. The point was distance, and the threat that distance implied. Carthage misread a real enemy as a ritual problem. Rome staged a piece of fruit as an omen of war. One society could not see the danger in front of it. The other manufactured one to ratify a decision already made. The two failures are mirror images, and the mirror is the subject of this file. These two failures share a single mechanism. Name it frame lock. It is an interpretive model of an adversary that survives the evidence against it. It survives because the people who could revise it are the people the model serves. Carthage's model of Rome was built from experience. Rome was a powerful rival. You fought it over Sicily, over Sardinia, over Spain. Then you settled, paid what was owed, and resumed trade. For most of the Mediterranean in the 3rd century before the Common Era, this model described reality. Against Rome specifically, it was wrong. And it was wrong in a way that each war's outcome should have corrected. It was not corrected, and the reason is structural. The men who governed Carthage were merchants and landowners. A commercial elite reads a defeat as a cost. A cost is something you absorb, price in, and recover from. Reading it instead as proof that the enemy wants you erased is harder. It requires abandoning the frame that puts you in charge. The frame expressed the interest of the men who read it. It was never a neutral description. That is why the disconfirming evidence kept arriving and kept being absorbed. Each separate decision was defensible. Pay the indemnity, cede the island, file the appeal. The error was never in the single choice. It lay in the model that made every choice the same kind of choice. The treaty system was the instrument that turned the lock. Carthage treated treaties as mutual obligations. Rome used them as a ratchet, tightening with each turn. The seizure of Sardinia in 237 should have ended the illusion. Polybius saw it clearly and named it the cause of the next war. Carthage saw it and went to Spain. The wealth of Spain let Carthage pay the price of 237 without confronting what 237 meant. The frame was now funded. The settlement of 201 then built the ratchet into Carthage's own border. Massinissa became a Roman instrument entitled to take, while Carthage was forbidden to respond. The appeals to arbitration across the next half-century were the frame working exactly as designed. The lock closed in 149. Carthage surrendered its hostages, then its weapons, to prove that it would comply. Only when the city stood defenseless did Rome name the real price. Abandon the coast, cease to be a port. To move 10 miles inland was to surrender the harbour, the fleet and the trade. It was to give up the entire basis of the city. The demand was built to be refused, because Rome had already chosen war. The commercial frame made its final move. It traded away every piece of leverage in pursuit of a settlement that was never on the table. Then the city rearmed in a matter of weeks and held out for 3 years. The capacity to resist had been there the whole time. Only the reading was missing. This reading should be set against the alternatives. The oldest is Roman fear. Polybius already framed the war, partly through it. The Roman senator Scipio Nasica argued openly that Carthage should be preserved. A surviving rival, he held, would keep Rome disciplined through fear. A second reading, argued by the historian William Harris, locates the cause in Rome's own appetite for war and conquest. This file does not deny either one. Most modern scholarship, including Goldsworthy, Miles and Hoyos, agrees that Carthage posed no real military threat by 149. The disagreement among historians is about Rome's motive. It is not about Carthage's blindness. On that point, the sources converge. That agreement does not weaken the diagnosis. It sharpens it. Here is the sharpened point. The danger to Carthage did not live in anything Carthage did. It lived in what Rome had decided Carthage was. A frame built to read your own conduct cannot see a danger that lives only in someone else's intentions. With the reading fixed, the ending was already determined. What remained was the sequence. Rome declared war in 149. The neighboring city of Utica went over to the Roman side at once. Carthage sent embassy after embassy offering submission. It surrendered its hostages and then, on command, its weapons. Appian gives the figures the city handed over: 200,000 sets of armor and 2,000 catapults. Only then did the consuls deliver the order to abandon the coast. Carthage refused. What the city did next showed what it had always been capable of. It rearmed itself from nothing. Appian describes workshops running day and night. He reports that women cut their hair to make cords for the catapults. The Carthaginians had given away their weapons to prove good faith. Now they built more behind their walls and prepared to hold. For 2 years the siege stalled. Roman commanders failed against the walls and the harbour. In 147 the command passed to Scipio Aemilianus, granted the office below the legalage by special vote. He moved to seal the harbour. Carthage's military port was a circular basin called the Kothon, ringed with covered shipsheds. Appian says it could hold more than 200 warships. The exact number is disputed, the scale is not. Scipio closed the sea approach with a great stone mole. The Carthaginians answered. They cut a new harbour mouth through the rock and sailed out a fleet built inside the blockade. The engineering was equal to the crisis. The strategy that might have prevented the crisis had never come. The end came in the spring of 146. The Romans broke in and fought upward through the streets for 6 days. The fighting ran from the harbour to the citadel on the Birksa hill. The city burned. Appian reports that some 50,000 survivors came out of the citadel and were sold into slavery. The figure is his estimate, not a census. The defence had been led by a commander named Hasdrubal. He surrendered when the city fell. His wife, the sources say, walked into the flames with their children rather than follow him. Rome then performed the erasure as a rite. Macrobius preserves the formula. A Roman general called out a city's own gods and devoted the place to destruction. Carthage was unfounded on purpose. Polybius stood beside Scipio as the city burned. He records that the victor wept and recited 2 lines of Homer on the fall of Troy. Asked why, Scipio said he feared the same end would one day come to Rome. The man erasing a city could read the mortality of empires. The city being erased had never read its own. The diagnosis is this: Carthage did not fall because it was weak. It fell because it read an enemy bent on erasing it through a frame built for ordinary rivals. It could not revise that frame. The men who would have revised it were the men the frame kept in power. 3 wars across 118 years taught the same lesson each time. Rome's demands expanded to fill whatever Carthage conceded. Each time, Carthage paid the cost and kept the frame. In 149 it disarmed itself in the belief that good faith would be returned. The belief was the failure. The pattern is frame lock. An interpretive model outlives the evidence against it, because revising the model threatens the people who hold it. It recurs. Northern Song China managed its northern frontier for a century through tribute and treaty. When the Jurchen Jin rose, Song read them as another treaty partner and allied with them against the older rival. The frame had no category for an ally bent on conquest. In the year 1127 of the Common Era, the Jin took the Song capital at Kaifeng and carried its emperor into captivity. The structure is identical, a frame that had worked for a century against one rival, a new adversary that did not fit it, an elite that kept applying the old frame because it had no other. The frame that had kept the peace was the frame that missed the war. Return to the envoys at Utica. They walk back to a city they have just disarmed. They carry the order to leave the sea. They believed they were still negotiating. They were not. The demand to abandon the coast was not the harsh opening of a settlement. It was the proof that no settlement had ever been on offer.